Привет! Hello, YouTubers and connoisseurs. Welcome to the next episode from CollectRussia.com. Igor, what do you have for us today?
Hi everybody. Today we will be discussing a sort of unusual subject. And I have to admit, I was opportunistic in choosing what to discuss today. And the reason we are talking about this particular medal is that it's so uncommon. And just like we once had before, we have a fake that represents all the best things about fakes.
I love that.
It's a perfect fake to compare with the original example. And on top of that, this original example of a pretty obscure Soviet award that many collectors heard about, some probably still are looking for it, it happens to have variations, believe it or not, even though it existed for just 3 years. There are variations within this
Of originals,
of
right?
originals
Okay.
within this short time frame, and I happen to have one of the two variations which is more scarce, and on top of that, it has a very unique, or I shouldn't say unique, very uncommon feature even for that variation. And I'll demonstrate what it is, and we will also look at the fakes. One fake, at least, that I have now, and that will pretty much tell you everything you need to know about fakes. And if you're careful, you won't make any mistake finding an original. But the order has a long prehistory, and it's one of the last Soviet awards in general. It only appeared in 1988, but it looks like something that is one of the most common and longest existing Soviet decorations. It's Order of Honor. It's called Order of Honor. And Order of Honor, it sounds familiar to everybody who ever collected Soviet medals, because there is an Order of Badge of Honor that existed for a very long time. It's one, as I said, one of the most common Soviet orders, for sure, one of the most available.
Right.
And you would never think that the common version of its suspension type order may actually be rare. But in fact, there are some rarities among the early examples, but also in 1988, this award was canceled, was abolished.
Okay.
And we can talk about reasons for that. They're actually funny. But the point is, instead of that award, a new one was instituted called Order of Honor instead of the earlier name Order of Badge of Honor.
Okay.
And there were only 3 years to be issued for it, because in 1991 it got discontinued. Some of the earlier Soviet awards continued being issued even after the collapse of the Soviet Union for another few years. They were usually taken from existing stocks and given out up until 1994, when Yeltsin's government finally came up with the new award system, and those were completely different from the early Soviet model. But in 1991, one thing for sure, for certain, is that there were no more issues of the Order of Honor, at least none that I know of. There might have been some occasional ones, but that would be an exception from the general rule. So 1991 is when it ended. So there is a huge difference in the number of issues of this last version that's called differently, and it's considered a different award, and the earlier Badge of Honor. And before we get into that, I want to just go very briefly over this Soviet order, the familiar one. It has a very rich history. It has many types and variations, some of them extremely rare, very interesting. It's interesting in terms of design. It's very, very Soviet, quintessentially Soviet. It's also kind of incongruous. It's almost created as an afterthought and almost by an accident. So it's one of the most mysterious, you could say, of all important Soviet decorations. And going back to its origins, we know that the first Soviet order of all was Order of the Red Banner. It's sometimes incorrectly called Order of Combat Red Banner, but in a sense that's what it is. but the correct name for it is Order of the Red Banner. It appeared during the Russian Civil War, pretty early in the game. It went contrary already to what Bolsheviks were preaching, because order means a special class of people, special group. The meaning of it in Soviet times changed, of course. It became more of a simply decoration. But nevertheless, there were special privileges that, of course, Bolsheviks initially denounced. And this developed later into a whole system of decorations that each republic, even before Soviet Union existed, even before all the republics became united, there were decorations established in those Soviet semi-independent, quasi-independent states, such as red banners of various republics. And then later, civil war was still going on, but already there was an idea of the Order of Red Banner of Labor. Again, initially there was one for Russian Federation, and then other republics, such as Ukraine, for example, or Belarus, came up with their own. Some of them are extremely rare and interesting. Then this coalesced into the all-Soviet orders, and by 1930, all those early Republican awards got replaced by the all-Union version. In some cases, the old stocks were continued being issued. Case in point is Order of the Red Banner, even the RSFSR, the original 1918 version. Of course, Soviet Union didn't exist then, so it says RSFSR, Russian Federation.
Right.
It was issued well into early 1930s, 1932, 33, but eventually that got replaced by the all-Union correct, so to speak, version. Same as Order of Red Banner of Labor. Then at that approximate time, other decorations appeared. So this system is kind of spreading. Initially, it was very kind of succinct. There were very few orders, and they were issued very sparingly for very tangible, serious achievements. Now it becomes more imperial, and new reasons for various awards are being invented. And now we have Order of the Red Star, which is a peacetime invention, you could say, even though it's a military order, strictly military. That appeared in April 1930. Later that same year, in May, almost immediately, Order of Lenin, the highest Soviet order of all, sort of one ring to rule them all. And that, again, had a very interesting and complicated history. The first version was almost nothing like the later issues. And same could be said about Order of Red Banner of Labor. The first one has a very striking design with Dnieper there, and it's different shape. It's completely different from what you usually see. And then that same year, they started, you could even say before, but around that time, they started awarding so-called certificate of Gramota of the Central Committee or Central Executive Committee of the Soviet government, which wasn't really governed by any rules, unlike orders. Orders had special statutes. There were special decrees establishing them, and it was very strictly regulated who could receive it. At least initially, it was very thoroughly followed. It was only the central government that could award them. There was also a certificate that was issued to heroes of labor or Stakhanovite workers. And that was, it could be awarded by various industries or localities, but the main one was the Gramota or honorary certificate of the Central Committee. Central Executive Committee. And again, interestingly enough, it wasn't considered decoration. It was kind of murky about laws that governed its issuance. There was no specific law, and there was no medal associated.
There was no medal associated.
There was no medal. It was just a piece of paper, but it was an important piece of paper.
Course.
You were a special person if you received it. Then, in 1935, Soviet government, for whatever reason, came up with the idea of a new decoration that you would think was totally unnecessary. And that decoration, even the name of it, was kind of weird. It would be called Badge of Honor. And the anecdote, which we actually have reasons to believe, is that Stalin attended a concert by the Red Army dance and song group ensemble and was so pleased with their performance that he just matter-of-factly said, well, we got to award them with something. Only, as a second thought, not quite high as the Order of Red Banner of Labor, that they don't quite deserve. That would be a little bit too much. Well, lo and behold, within days, there is a design for the Badge of Honor. It's not even called an order.
Right.
Because again, its status is sort of murky. It's thought of as something that is to be awarded with the gramota or certificate of the Central Executive Committee. Only now it's a tangible sign of achievement, and by that time there were already many various badges of heroes of labor, hero of revolution, hero of revolutionary movement, and so forth and so on. Most of them were for labor, and they were, of course, awarded on a lower level than the central government. Now central government suddenly decides to issue a labor order that could, by the way, be awarded to the military as well for outstanding achievements in, for example, building the preparedness of the troops or developing war industries and stuff like that. But it's considered a peacetime decoration. It's mainly for labor, mainly for civilians. And again, they call it Badge of Honor because nobody really thinks that this should be one of the orders. And hence, this very incongruous name. In Russian, actually, it sounds exactly, as you know, as Order Badge of Honor. There is no over. It's simply Order Badge of Honor. And again, it's very funny that when the decree was issued about this order, they on a number of occasions forgot to call it an order. So the decree was correct, establishing the Order Badge of Honor, quote unquote, Badge of Honor.
Right.
But then in the regulations concerning the order, concerning who could be issued and how it can be repelled, or what are the authorities that issue the decoration, they often forget to say that this is an order. They still refer to it as a badge. And fittingly for a badge, the first version of it comes in an almost tiny size. The first, very rare version of the Order of Badge of Honor is a so-called in Russian malish, or miniature, or young one, little one. Little one. It was supposed to be worn if someone was awarded with more than one decoration, say with Order of Lenin and Order of Red Banner, then the Badge of Honor, the Badge of Honor would be worn last. And that may be the idea of why it's so small in size. Many European collectors would refer it as princeton size. Much smaller than others, not quite a miniature, not a lapel piece, but still way smaller than others. That design was considered not very successful. It's certainly very, very Soviet, and I'm sure you've seen regular size, most collectors have seen regular size orders of Badge of Honor. The early one is very, very similar, unlike other cases like Red Banner of Labor, for example, that was completely redesigned in a few years, and Order of Lenin as well. But Badge of Honor is very similar, but the construction of it was very awkward. It was very unreliable. Many of them simply disassembled, fell apart. It was also very expensive to produce. So within a year, it gets redesigned. Now its size brought to normal, expanded. And also the construction is much more streamlined. It doesn't, for example, have all these pins that hold the letters CCCP, USSR.
Oh my God.
That
Each
original
letter
scale.
was,
Each letter was attached by
Oh
a
my
special
God.
pin. And those pins often broke and letters got lost and so forth and so on. So now it's much more in line with other Soviet awards. It's a screwback type, so it has to be screwed on the tunic or uniform, and it existed in that form with some variations until 1943. In 43, as we know, many Soviet decorations, many of the early ones, such as Red Banner, for example, or Lenin, get redesigned. Those that were screwbacks become suspensions. Some of the early suspension medals that existed at that time. They get redesigned as well. So there is this big change in the uniform code and in appearance of the medals. So the most familiar version is the suspension type. Again, it had some changes over its post-war history, late war post-war history. The originals were the initial ones were heavier. Then it become hollow. They're trying to save on materials. You can already see where sort of this whole thing is going, because decorations, previously it would be unthinkable, they get slightly cheapened. The overt appearance on the obverse is still the same. They're still using precious metals, nothing less than silver. Case in point is badge of honor. They're all made in silver, even the very late ones. But of course they try to cut corners in terms of ease of production, the cost of production. Socialism or not, they're now facing the reality of running out of many things and money. So they become hollow. Then the very late version is solid piece construction. Remember those letters on the very early ones? They were a problem. They figured it out. They started soldering them, but it was still an expensive, laborious procedure. So now the late version is all stamped in one piece. And all in all, they produced approximately 1.5 million of orders of badge of honor. So as I said, it's one of the most common Soviet decoration. It's still beautifully made, no matter how late. They might have lightened them up a little bit and cut corners here and there, but it's not really noticeable, to be honest. And even the very late issues are of very high quality overall. So when you go to a military show, you certainly, if you paid any attention to Soviet medals, you've seen not necessarily tons of them, but you've seen quite a lot. They're everywhere. They're very common. Now, in 1988, a very interesting thing happens, and that's the old order of badge of honor is suddenly abolished. And in its stead, there's a new decoration called Order of Honor. And we can talk about why it happened. Why was it necessary? And the simple answer is there was new administration. They needed to show that they are doing major changes in the Soviet system. And one of the key Soviet designers, or you could say the most venerable, the most famous at that time, Alexander Zhuk, really pushed for changing this decoration because it sounded wrong. Badge of honor, why is it a badge? Of course, it was now remembered that, hey, it shouldn't be called a badge if it's an order.
Right.
That's number one. Number two, the design is kind of awkward. It's interesting in its own way. It's very unique. But to a real medal designer or an artist, this is anathema. For graphic designer, the way the words are split on the banner, it's all incorrect. These are not real syllables. The way it's spelled out. The bottom looks wrong. The figures of the workers, they look almost cartoonish, childish. This is not how people look. And by the way, they changed it over time somewhat. The earlier issues, even of the suspension type, had this more childlike proportions of the female and male worker, and they kind of become more adult-like in the later versions.
As years went by, they grew
right,
up.
they grew up, I guess. But it was still kind of an eyesore for a refined and standard-looking, standard-seeking Soviet medal designer. So it was decided that it would be completely overhauled, and such was the promise. But then all of a sudden, it all fizzled into practically nothing with one little change. The design of the order remained the same, but there was a little part added at the bottom that covered the name Badge of Honor. That was the simple solution to the old problem without creating a brand new look for the new award, which was expected by everybody. And you may ask why. It's 1988. Soviet Union is at the end of its rope already. They are already facing not so much the writing on the wall; those walls are already collapsing. Soviet Union is at the end of its Afghan adventure. Soviet Union just experienced the Chernobyl catastrophe, and overall meltdown of economy is underway. And simultaneous with it, the attempts to break away by various republics. There are nationalist movements practically in every Soviet republic. And it's becoming obvious that Soviet leadership is simply running out of money. They are running out of hard currency. This new economic program, perestroika, it doesn't really chime well with the old Soviet system. So you cannot just partly replace it or partly change it. The whole thing is starting to crack and collapse. And in this situation, decision is already taken. They can't take it back. They can go back. That would be embarrassing. So instead of designing and manufacturing an expensive new award, they simply take the stock of the existing old ones, erase the writing at the bottom, drill holes in it, literally, and put little plaque that says nothing.
Nothing there.
It just has hammer and sickle and laurel leaf.
Awesome.
On both sides, there are
Kudos to
laurels.
the inventor.
That was certainly a brilliant solution under the
Oh, yeah.
circumstances, you could say. So a very, very curious thing. And that leads to a problem for collectors. Reason being, it's pretty easy to fake. All of these originals are made from the existing stock. They continue the serial number sequence, so there is no special serial number for order of honor. And in fact, those serial numbers overlap because orders were not produced in sequence, in strict sequence. There would be a range produced by one mint, and that would be distributed. Range produced, distributed. So some of them were sort of caught at the mint before they got distributed. Others have already left and were awarded to their lucky recipients. So the serial number ranges for the two, for the old badge of honor and order of honor, overlap. So just by serial number alone, you cannot with certainty tell if this is an order of honor, if this is the scale one. And just to give you an idea, there were about 10,000 of them issued during the entire period of its existence, compared to 1.5 million of order of badge of honor. Of course, there is an incentive to produce fakes. And those fakes were produced for a very long time by simply creating a replica of the reef with the hammer and sickle, drilling holes, doing basically the same job that mint did, except for there are ways to tell, and I'll demonstrate how. That aside, just to touch very briefly on the serial number ranges, the minimal number that I know of is 463,430, so just under 1.5 million.
Okay.
And the highest number that I know of is 1,578,503. So it goes almost to 1.6 million, almost, and it starts just under 1.5, roughly. Again, much of this range is filled up by badges of honor, by the old order, and some of the serial numbers were probably never issued, like was the Soviet practice in many cases. That pretty much covers what you need to know about history, what I think is relevant. At some point later on, we will go into the details of the earlier decorations. That's a story of its own. But speaking of the Order of Honor, these are all the important facts. Now, one last thing that I have to say about the statute of the order. And again, it's very interesting that there was not even a statute of the Order of Badge of Honor when it was created. They sort of forgot about that too. They briefly said who could be awarded, but then there was no specification. Every Soviet order or other decoration had a statute. There was no statute for Badge of Honor until 1980.
Oh my God.
They sort of forgot. Then, according to that statute, they finally spelled out very precisely who could be awarded. And the difference with the early Order of Honor, had a very reduced categories, greatly reduced categories of people who could receive it. First of all, no foreigners could be awarded. unlike the Order of Badge of Honor. They stopped the practice of awarding cities or teams of workers, industrial enterprises,
Purely
and so
individual.
forth. So it could be purely individual. It wouldn't be awarded for valiant deeds during peacetime, for saving somebody's life, for example. For that, there was another order instituted at about the same time, order for personal courage. And of course, for all the military deeds, there were still old decorations such as Red Banner and so forth, Red Star. It was no longer awarded for overachieving quota or for being a Stahanovite worker. That wouldn't be enough to be awarded this Order of Order, unlike Order of Badge of Honor. And the one additional category for which it could be awarded was scientific inventions, because I guess Soviet Union was in dire need of any kind of progress, and they were literally grasping for straws. That's my theory. I don't know if it's true or not. What was there actually on their mind? It was simply a bureaucratic play, busybody sort of trying to
Double guessing bureaucrats is a losing proposition.
I know. So for what it's worth, that's briefly the history. Now let's look at the badges of honor. I have a couple of samples of the earlier ones, just to compare, and we will get to the peculiarities of the Order of Honor, and most importantly, fake next to the original piece.
I can't wait.
Excellent. And ladies and gentlemen, this is your history of Order of Badge of Honor in a nutshell, without the miniature, which I don't have right now, but someday I'm hoping to feature it in one of our future episodes. But in the meantime, the main parts, the main types of the order here, Order of Badge of Honor, the so-called screwback, the pre-1943 version. Then we have 1943 type, so-called flatback. You see how it's massive in its construction compared to the later pieces. I happen to have a very unusual piece here which lacks the mint mark. This is something you don't see every day. Speaking of variations of suspension type order, there are some of them that are extremely rare, and this is one of them. Then the later version that was hollowback, and some of them, as I said, the early ones had separate letters, just like the flatback. Later ones were single-piece construction, and that concerns also the Order of Badge of Honor, Order of Honor rather. This is one of the very, very late issues, and I'll show it separately, a close-up, because it deserves special attention. This is what you're unlikely to see, because a lot of this had been utilized as of now to make fake orders of honor. The serial number is high enough, so it would allow the faker, without changing anything really, to be convincing enough.
I hope to be convincing.
You don't need to change the serial number.
Right.
All you need to do is just add fake rivets and fake plaque. And now the last version, or a new order you could say, Order of Order, only beware, one of these two is a fake.
Interesting.
And they may look exactly alike at the first glance, so you have to be careful and know what signs to look for. And there are some very obvious signs, and we will discuss it in a little bit more detail.
Okay.
So now, that being said, let's get to the main point of our today's discussion.
Okay.
Okay, so here's an example for you of a pretty late issue Order of Badge of Honor. It's still the old design. It says Badge of Honor here at the bottom. Single piece construction, all the letters are part of the badge, struck in single piece with one die. And you will notice that there is an underline, and this is important. There's an underline under the serial number. This underline is straight, it's a part of the die, it's not engraved, unlike the serial number itself. On the late pieces, serial numbers were engraved with rotating tool. There's a mint mark here that didn't really change until the end. Even the Order of Honor has exact same mint mark for the reason that it simply utilizes the old badges. that were unissued yet. This is one of the kind of not oddities, but one of the unlikely pieces to find. Look at the serial number. It's well above 1.5 million, 155 and so forth. And that tells you immediately that this is an unlikely survivor, because these orders, and I will try to show a little bit better detail here. These issues, this very late 156 actually, serial number, they were likely to be utilized by the fakers. Serial number is high enough for them. You'll notice one very peculiar thing about it. Look at this underline. When you take a very close look,
We need to move it a little bit. Let me help.
there you go.
So,
When you take a very close look, you will notice that it makes a sort of a curve that curves up
right.
from
Several
about 2/3. No, it's the right side of it that I'm talking about. The last
okay.
third
Okay.
of it, or maybe a quarter, where it takes a kind of curve upwards. This is peculiar to almost all the orders of honor that were taken from that last series of badges of honor. Almost all of them have this line curving upwards.
So that's how the die went. Or
Exactly, it's
Okay.
a part of the
Part
die.
of the die.
Part of the die.
Okay.
Almost all, I should say, but not all. And this is why this piece that we have here, and that I also want to show you, is very unusual. You will notice that the serial number is 1.5, almost exactly at 1.5 million. It's one of the earliest numbered orders of badge of honor that were converted by the Mint. And for that reason, it does not yet have that curve in the underline. So it's a pretty uncommon, I would say very rare actually, subvariation of Order of Honor. Otherwise, it looks like all of them. And there are two versions of it, you could say, depending on what mint produced it. Most of them were produced by the Leningrad Mint, some were by Moscow Mint, and those produced by both Leningrad and Moscow Mint mostly had this letter R more curved than what you see here. And you see that it's elongated, this R,
Right,
it
yes.
looks like P, it's a Russian R, and it stands for SSSR or USSR. And this R may have two different possible shapes. It may be elongated like it is here, and that's peculiar feature of the Moscow Mint production. Only Moscow Mint produced badges of honor that were converted later into Order of Honor that had that elongated R, or what looks like P. Others produced by mostly Leningrad Mint, but also some produced by Moscow Mint, had a slightly shorter upper end,
half a circle instead of this.
Exactly. It's more like half a circle than this ellipsoid, almost you could say. All right. So that being said, I can't say that this makes it enormously rare in and of itself, but the line, the straight line,
right.
certainly does. It's a rarity. Still well within the known serial number range, so nothing special here. Take a close look at how the rivets look. And this, as I said, was done at the Mint. It was afterthought, but all the work was still done at the Soviet Mint. And what they did is they drilled very carefully, drilled holes on this edge of the badge, and sometimes they fit perfectly within the borders of this flat area. Sometimes they are right at the border.
That can be inside here.
So it can be, it can actually touch this hollow area. Nothing unusual about this. This is perfectly normal on originals. So it doesn't have to fit precisely, but what will be very precise is the shape of the hole. You see this concentric ring around the rivet itself?
Yeah.
It's very precise. And the rivet itself is dome-shaped. It's very perfect. It's a perfect spherical or semi-half spherical form. Now, let's get to the fake. And you will see some noticeable differences. Look at what they did here. Again, nothing wrong with the serial number. Nothing wrong with the serial number.
Move them a little bit so I can zoom in better.
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah. And look how professionally the serial number is engraved.
Yeah.
They didn't have to try because they took an existing piece.
Mm-hmm.
But look at the way that the holes were
The
driven.
rivets. They're
The
totally
rivets
different.
are flat, misshapen.
Yes.
Also, look
And the
at the
holes, oh
look
my
at the
God.
holes. Yeah,
Oh
they're
my
very,
God.
very imprecise,
Yes.
very wrong.
They're
See,
not
they
even
have
round.
raw edges.
Yes.
So that's a dead giveaway. It's curious to me that whoever was the faker went as far as changing the suspension device. See how suspension device on this piece is made in steel. It's a heavier suspension device.
Right.
On a late issue Badger Warner or Order
all
Warner,
aluminum.
it should be like this.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they get replaced for whatever reason. Like this one, for example, has an early suspension, even though it's a late issue. It should not have come like this. It should have a suspension just like this one here. I have it detached, or on this Order of Warner. But suspension, of course, is no indication
Right.
of whether it's original or not in and of itself. But it's just curious in my mind that whoever put it together incorrectly. That's not really that important, but what's important is the rivets. And last but not least, look at the edge of the plaque. And as I said, this is a separate piece
Yes.
made by a die at the mint for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You see how precise it is? You will see that the edge of it always has these lines perpendicular to the flat, to the projection of the plaque,
Right.
to the obverse and reverse of the plaque. And that's a sign that it was stamped by heavy machinery at the mint by a die. It's not a die cast replica. Look now at what this one looks like. You'll see a world of difference. It's not as precise, it doesn't fit as well. But most importantly, the edge itself doesn't have this characteristic features that the original must have.
It varies. Yeah.
It varies.
It's not always at 90
The quality
degrees.
in overall is not right.
Yeah.
But this is something they may eventually try and fake more convincingly.
Mm-hmm.
So you see the imprecision in the lines here,
Right.
in the way that hammer and sickle looks. It looks different than it should.
It's shorter.
Yeah.
It's smaller, I think.
It's just different shape overall. But look at the edge that really tells you the story, that there is no there's distinguishing marks of being stamped.
Mm-hmm.
So now
Interesting.
I think you're equipped well enough to go around military shows and maybe find one of the originals at the price of the regular Badger Warner.
Seriously.
There are some people out there who still don't know, may not notice the difference. Check for hammer and sickle. The case, look for hammer and sickle, but be sure it's done right.
Right.
Not one of
Okay.
the forgeries. Well,
very good.
this was our episode for today. I know it was a brief one.
No, but it was so interesting.
But I realize we
the whole
cannot-
history, frankly, the history behind all this progression from
Right, yeah.
it's
You
so,
could see
it
how-
reads like
how
a novel of absurdity or something.
Right.
I don't know.
And you know,
So weird.
quoting T.S. Eliot, this is how the world will end, not with a bang, but with a whimper.
Exactly.
Right? So this is sort of what it came
Yep,
to. All the
yep,
grandiose
yep.
designs, and then finally this, scraping the bottom.
And even that faked.
And yeah, of course, because of the numismatic
Wow, the whole system was
interest.
Okay.
All right, hope
Thank
you
very
enjoyed
much.
it.
Oh, I
and,
certainly did.
And if you did, please press the like button. And we are looking forward to future episodes.
Thank you so much. Thank you.